Izzy sat in her sleek penthouse, the city of New York sprawling below her. The golden morning light filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long shadows across the room. Her fingers drummed absent-mindedly on her desk as she stared at the email that had changed everything. Forbes 30 under 40, the new face of digital finance. Safia Rivera's NFT empire reaches 3.8 billion valuation. The words blinked back at her from the screen, mocking the carefully constructed life she had spent years building. Her empire, her digital finance platform, which had quietly revolutionized personal finance for millions, was now being recognized. The article was set to go live tomorrow, and with it, her secret would be exposed to the world. Her family, her controlling traditionalist family, would know the truth. They would know that the once failed daughter, the one who had been written off as a dreamer, had become one of the wealthiest women in the world, all from a business they thought was nothing more than a phase. Izzy closed her eyes and leaned back in her chair, her mind swirling. For 15 years, she had kept this success hidden, living in plain sight, but far from her family's reach. She had played the role of the struggling artist in their eyes, the one who could never quite make it. She wore the same old clothes, drove the used car, and pretended to be living paycheck to paycheck. It was all part of the act, part of the sacrifice, all so that her family wouldn't know how much she had built. And now it was all about to come crashing down. Her phone buzzed on the desk, and without thinking, she picked it up. It was Marcus, her brother. She could already hear his voice in her head, the disbelief, the anger. He had been calling all morning, trying to get through. She knew what this call would be about. With a deep breath, Izzy answered. "Hello, Marcus." "What the hell, Izzy?" His voice was sharp, raw, and full of disbelief. "I just saw the article. How long have you been hiding this?" She could feel the heat rising in her chest, the tension thickening in her throat. Izzy walked to the window, looking out at the city, feeling the weight of his words. She had worked so hard for this moment, the moment when she would finally be seen. But now the sudden exposure felt like the ground was falling out beneath her. "I guess you'll have to wait for the article like everyone else," she said, her voice calm, measured. She wasn't going to let him see how much his words stung. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Marcus was calculating, trying to make sense of it all. His voice was softer when he spoke again. "You lied to us," he said, a hint of hurt creeping in. "Mom and Dad, they've been worried sick about you. For years, Izzy." Izzy could feel her heart tighten in her chest. Her family's concern had never been about love. It was about control, about making her fit into their mold, about ensuring she walked the path they had laid out for her. "Worried?" Izzy repeated, the bitterness creeping into her tone. "Is that what you call it? The lectures? The constant reminders about getting a real job? They never worried. They just wanted me to be you." She heard the crack in Marcus's voice when he responded. "I'm trying to understand, Izzy. You've been hiding this for years. Why?" She turned away from the window, the weight of the question heavy in her chest. "Because I didn't want to be what they wanted me to be. I didn't want to be you, Marcus. I wanted to be myself. And this business, it's who I am." The silence between them was thick. Izzy knew Marcus wasn't used to this side of her. He had always been the good son, the one who followed the rules. But for Izzy, the rules had never made sense. "I'm sorry, Izzy," Marcus said, his voice soft, almost defeated. "I don't know what to say." "There's nothing left to say," Izzy replied, her words cutting through the tension like a knife. "But don't worry, Marcus. You'll find out soon enough." She ended the call without waiting for his response, the weight of the truth settling on her shoulders. The world would know her success tomorrow. Her family would finally see what she had built, but it wouldn't be on her terms anymore. With a final glance at her phone, Izzy put it down. She had nothing to hide anymore. Izzy leaned back in her chair, her fingers gently tracing the edge of the glass tabletop as her thoughts wandered back to her childhood. She could almost hear her father's booming voice in the background of their sprawling estate, dictating the rules of the world he had carved out for himself and his children. The expectations were clear, but they were never hers. They never fit her dreams. Her father, Don Rivera, had always been a man of tradition, of old money. An imposing figure with his perfectly tailored suits and sharp, calculating gaze, he had never understood Izzy's desire to break free. From the moment she showed an interest in digital finance, an industry so new, so untested, he dismissed it as a childish whim, a phase. He had worked hard to build his empire in traditional investments, and he expected his children to follow in his footsteps. "You're wasting your potential," he would say at family dinners, his voice dripping with disdain. "You'll never amount to anything in this new, flashy world. You need stability." Izzy could still feel the sting of those words. Her mother, Alina, would chime in softly, trying to comfort her, but always in the way that made it clear she was just going through the motions. "Sweetie, we just want what's best for you." The same line, time after time, as if she hadn't heard it 1,000 times before. But Izzy didn't want what they wanted. She didn't want to play it safe, to live a life of stability in a world where she felt suffocated. And so, at the age of 22, fresh out of college with a finance degree in hand, she made the bold decision to go her own way. She turned down the job at her father's firm, and instead she picked up a different kind of project, one that would challenge the entire system they had spent their lives upholding. Digital finance, cryptocurrency, NFTs. These things didn't make sense to her family, and they were determined to make her believe she was doomed for failure. And so, she played her part. Every time she came home, she drove the same old Honda, wore simple clothes, and pretended to live paycheck to paycheck. "It's just a phase," she told herself every time her father looked at her with those disappointed eyes. She would smile and nod, pretending to struggle. It wasn't deception, exactly. It was survival. If she wanted to keep the peace and avoid their criticism, she needed to maintain the charade. Meanwhile, she built an empire in secret. In the quiet of her tiny Brooklyn studio apartment, she spent long hours developing her platform, learning blockchain technology, and diving into the world of digital art. She sold her first NFT collection for $50,000, a modest amount at the time. But it wasn't just about the money. It was about proving to herself that she could build something real. And when the world caught on, when her art started selling out, when the tech companies started calling, her family had no idea. They still saw her as the black sheep, the one who couldn't handle the real world. But here she was now, facing the inevitable truth. The secret was out. The Forbes article had announced what she had built, and there was no going back. Her parents would have to face the fact that their daughter had achieved something far bigger than they ever thought possible. And that's when it hit her. She had spent her entire life trying to gain their approval, playing the role of the failure, just so they wouldn't know she was succeeding. What would they say when they found out the truth? Could they ever see her as more than the dreamer they had written off all those years ago? Her phone buzzed again, dragging her out of her thoughts. Another message from Marcus. She didn't need to open it. She already knew what it would say, and she wasn't ready to respond. Not yet. Izzy stared at her phone, the name Marcus flashing on the screen. Her brother's name never failed to send a ripple of unease through her. She knew he was probably calling to confront her again after the Forbes article had gone live. The realization that her secret was out was still settling in, and she hadn't been able to shake the growing tension in her chest. She picked up the phone on the third ring, trying to mask the tightness in her voice. "Hello, Marcus." "Izzy." His voice was sharp, almost frantic. "What the hell is going on?" The raw disbelief was evident in every syllable. "You let this go public? You let the world know?" There was a pause, as though he was trying to process everything in real time. "How long, Izzy? How long have you been hiding this from us?" Izzy leaned back in her chair, her eyes darting over to the view of Manhattan below. The city looked beautiful, unbothered by the storm swirling inside her. She took a steadying breath before speaking, trying to keep her voice calm. "It's all in the article, Marcus. You'll know everything soon enough." "No, I need you to tell me now," he insisted, a frustrated edge creeping into his tone. "Why didn't you say anything? We've been worried sick about you all these years. Mom and Dad, they thought you were barely getting by, Izzy. We all thought you were struggling." Izzy's grip on the phone tightened, her fingers pressing hard into the edge. The words stung more than they should have, but she'd heard them 1,000 times before. She could almost picture her parents, Don with his disapproving gaze, and Alina offering her that weak, condescending sympathy, the concern that was more about control than care. "Worried?" Izzy's laugh was short, bitter. "Is that what you call it? The lectures? The constant comments about getting a real job? The shameful glances when I said I was working on something different? That is your idea of worrying?" She heard a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. Marcus didn't respond immediately. Izzy could feel the weight of his thoughts, the shift as he processed everything. "You've been living a lie," he said quietly, his voice thick with confusion. "All these years, you've let us think that you were struggling. And now, this." He paused. I don't get it. Why?" Izzy stood up and walked toward the window, her back to the city. She needed to be far away from it for a moment, to ground herself before the storm of emotions overwhelmed her. Her reflection stared back at her in the glass, her face the same as it had been when she first left home. But now, she wasn't the same. She wasn't the person who had followed their rules, who had tried to fit in. She had built something of her own, something they couldn't understand. "Because I didn't want to be what they wanted me to be," Izzy said, the words coming out before she had time to stop them. "I didn't want to be you, Marcus. I didn't want to play their game. I wanted to create something real, and I did. But you wouldn't understand that. None of you would. There was a silence on the other end. Izzy could feel her pulse racing. The pressure in her chest was starting to feel unbearable, but she refused to let it show. She wasn't going to break. Not this time. Marcus's voice came through, quieter now, almost uncertain. But how? How did you keep this from us for so long? Izzy's lips curled into a small, sad smile. She could hear the doubt in his voice, the disbelief that she had kept this secret for years. But it wasn't just about hiding her wealth. It was about keeping her sense of self intact, about not letting them push her back into their mold. I had to, she said simply. You don't get it, Marcus. But that's okay. You will soon enough. With that, she ended the call. The familiar sense of isolation crept over her again, but this time, it didn't feel as suffocating. The truth was out there now. She had done what she had to do, and whatever happened next would be her own doing. Izzy didn't want to face them, not yet, but she knew it was inevitable. The phone call with Marcus had barely ended when her mother, Alina, texted her, "Call us. We need to talk." It was more of a demand than a request, wrapped in the delicate shell of concern, a tone Izzy knew too well. She paced back and forth in her penthouse, her mind whirring. The private jet, the penthouse, the luxury she'd carefully surrounded herself with. All of it was a life her family didn't understand, a life they never wanted for her. But now, as she stood there, waiting for her parents to reach out, she realized that she was no longer the young girl they tried to mold. She was an adult, one who had built something no one else could see. A knock on the door interrupted her thoughts, followed by Sarah's voice from the intercom. "Miss Sullivan, your mother is on the line. She insists on speaking with you now." Izzy took a deep breath, glanced at the Forbes article once more, then clicked the intercom. "Send her in." Minutes later, Alina stepped through the door, looking as pristine as ever, despite the undercurrent of unease radiating from her. Her makeup was impeccable, her designer dress perfect. But today, her posture was different, tense, uncertain. It was as if the ground beneath her feet had shifted, and she couldn't find her balance. Izzy met her mother's eyes, holding the cool composure she had cultivated over the years. But inside, her chest tightened. She had feared this moment for so long, but now that it had arrived, she wasn't sure she was ready for it. "Izzy," Alina said softly, her voice cracking with emotion. "What is this? This article? All these years, and we had no idea." Izzy didn't respond right away. She couldn't. It felt surreal, hearing the words come out of her mother's mouth, the very same words that had haunted her for so long. For years, Izzy had been ignored, doubted, and now her success was being held up like a mirror, reflecting everything she'd worked so hard to hide. "You've been hiding this?" Alina repeated, her voice rising, not in anger, but in disbelief. "How could you do this to us? To your family?" Izzy crossed her arms, trying to remain steady. "I didn't do anything to you, Mom. I didn't need to prove myself to you. I was just living my life. My life," she emphasized, "not the one you planned for me." Her mother's eyes welled up, and for a moment, Izzy felt a pang of guilt. She hadn't expected this. She had expected anger, accusations, but not the broken look in her mother's eyes. "You were never there for us," Alina whispered, her voice trembling. "We had no idea if you were struggling or thriving. You left us in the dark, Izzy. Do you know how that feels?" The weight of her mother's words settled heavily in the room, and for a second, Izzy felt the sharp sting of regret. She had never wanted to hurt her family. She had only wanted to protect them from the pain of her choices, choices they would never understand. I did it for myself, Mom. You wouldn't have accepted what I was doing, and that's why I kept it hidden, Izzy said, her voice gaining strength. I needed to be free, free to succeed on my own terms, not to live in your shadow or follow your plans. Her mother's expression was a mixture of confusion and hurt, but there was something else there too, a flicker of realization. But you're my daughter, she whispered. I wanted to be part of your success. Why didn't you let us in? Izzy walked over to the large windows, her back turned to her mother. The city outside was bathed in sunlight, a stark contrast to the turmoil inside. Because, she said quietly, every time I tried to share it with you, you dismissed me. You called it a phase, a waste of time. There was silence for a long moment, and then Alina spoke again, her voice soft but filled with an undercurrent of pain. What have we missed, Izzy? What have we done to make you feel like this was the only way? Izzy didn't know how to answer. The truth was, she didn't know how to fix what had been broken. The years of misunderstanding, the dismissiveness, the control, it had all built up. Maybe this was the only way for her to be seen, for her family to understand her. I'm not the person you thought I was, Izzy finally said. But maybe, just maybe, you'll learn who I really am now. As her mother stood there, taking in her words, Izzy felt a sense of finality settle over her. The family she had longed for acceptance from might never understand, but she didn't need them to anymore. She had built something on her own, something no one could take from her, and she was ready to show them. Izzy sat at her desk, her fingers resting lightly on the edge of the invitation. The gold-embossed lettering gleamed under the soft glow of the desk lamp, catching her attention every time she looked away. The invitation to the annual Rivera family reunion. Her family had sent it with the usual mix of formality and expectation. But this year, everything was different. She had been dreading this day for weeks, the moment when her family would find out who she had truly become. The story in Forbes had already begun the process. Soon, they would be face to face with the truth. Her heart thudded uncomfortably in her chest as she imagined the look on her father's face when he walked into the reunion and saw his failing daughter standing before him, no longer hiding in the shadows of their expectations. The family reunion was always the same, a weekend retreat at their vineyard estate in Napa Valley, a place she had spent countless summers pretending to belong. The same lavish dinners, the same conversations about investments and stocks, the same routine that made Izzy feel like an outsider. But now she had a decision to make. She could attend, play the part of the struggling child they all expected her to be, or she could show them the woman she had become, the woman who had outgrown their control. Her gaze flickered to the private jet on the runway outside her window. She had just confirmed the flight arrangements with her assistant, Sarah, and everything was set. The island in the Caribbean, her island, where the reunion would take place, was ready. It wasn't just a reunion, it was her statement. Izzy picked up the phone and dialed Sarah's number. Is everything ready for the reunion? She asked, her voice steady, but there was an undercurrent of excitement that she couldn't hide. Yes, Miss Sullivan, Sarah replied, her voice efficient but warm. The jet is fueled and ready. The car service is arranged for all family members, and the venue has been updated to the private island as requested. NDAs have been prepared for all staff as well. Izzy smiled, her fingers curling around the edge of the phone. This was it, the moment she had been waiting for. She was taking control. No more pretending, no more hiding. She was going to show her family exactly what she had built and how wrong they had been about her all these years. She paused, looking at the invitation again, the weight of the decision pressing down on her. As she read the words on the thick ivory paper, she knew this was more than just an event. It was the culmination of a decade of hard work, of sacrifices they would never understand. "Perfect," she said, her voice firm and final. "Make sure everything is in place. I want this reunion to be unforgettable." She hung up the phone and walked over to the window. The city stretched before her, an endless sea of steel and glass, a reminder of all that she had achieved. This was her world now, not the world of Napa Valley, not the world of old money and expectations. This world, the one she had built from nothing, was where she belonged. In just a few days, her family would see the real Izzy Rivera, the one who had defied their every expectation, who had created something far beyond their wildest dreams. The invitation to the reunion was no longer just a formality. It was her declaration of independence. And it was time for them to hear her story. The day of the reunion arrived, bright and clear. Izzy stood at the tarmac of her private airfield, a cool breeze ruffling her dark hair as the sleek Rolls-Royces rolled toward her. Each car glided to a stop, one after the other, like the grand procession it was. The engines hummed to a quiet stop, and the doors opened. First, her father emerged. Don Rivera, his tall frame as imposing as ever, stepped out of the car. His perfectly tailored suit did nothing to hide the tension in his shoulders. He adjusted his cufflinks with practiced ease, his face a mask of controlled displeasure as his eyes scanned the surroundings. For a moment, he looked almost lost, an island of tradition in a sea of modernity. Behind him, her mother, Alina, stepped out. Her flawless makeup could not disguise the unease that clung to her like a second skin. Izzy watched as her mother's heels clicked sharply on the pavement, each step a reminder of the old world they both came from. Then came Marcus. He stepped out slowly, his eyes scanning the estate with a mix of confusion and disbelief. Marcus, always the one to toe the family line, now looked every bit the part of the disillusioned son, his usual confidence faltering. He had no idea what he was walking into, but Izzy could feel his gaze burning through her as he spotted her standing by the steps, waiting for them. Finally, Olivia emerged, her younger sister, always one to make an entrance. Olivia was the epitome of polished perfection, her designer handbag clasped tightly in her hand, her face a picture of well-manicured poise. She took in the scene with a huff, her eyes narrowing when they landed on Izzy. Even from across the tarmac, Izzy could see the jealousy simmering beneath Olivia's smile. She had always been the one to carry the family's image with ease, to brag about her successes without hesitation. The contrast between her and Izzy had never been starker. Izzy stood tall, feeling the weight of their stares. The reunion was no longer a simple family gathering. It was a moment of reckoning. She had built this new world, this island of her own, and now her family had no choice but to enter it. The luxury of the resort stretched out before them, a perfect blend of modern architecture and natural beauty, everything her family had turned their noses up at for years, now their reality. Her father stepped forward first, his eyes sharp as ever, but Izzy noticed the hint of something new in his gaze, a mixture of curiosity and reluctant admiration. He wasn't ready to admit it, but he could see it now. The world she'd created wasn't a phase, it wasn't a whim, it was real, it was powerful. "Sophia," he said, his voice gruff but quieter than usual. "What's all this?" Izzy smiled coolly, meeting his gaze without flinching. "Welcome, Dad. I thought the reunion deserved a change of scenery. Please, enjoy the ride." Her words were sharp, but she held her ground. She wasn't the child anymore, begging for validation. This was her moment to show them that her success wasn't just about the money, it was about the vision they had dismissed, the future they refused to see. The family hesitated, exchanging glances. Olivia's eyes flicked over to the massive private jet behind them, her lips parting in surprise, but she quickly masked it with a fake smile. The staff, immaculately dressed, greeted them with champagne and soft smiles as they boarded the plane. As the family stepped into the jet, their eyes darting around, Izzy felt a slight twinge of satisfaction. The opulence of the private jet, the champagne, the rare art pieces, it was all hers, and soon they would have no choice but to acknowledge the life she had built. They couldn't pretend anymore that she was the same Izzy they had left behind. She wasn't their disappointment, their failure. She was something else entirely. Izzy took her seat, leaning back with a sigh of relief. This was just the beginning. The dining room was a masterpiece of design. It was bright and airy, with floor-to-ceiling windows that opened up to a breathtaking view of the ocean below. The table was set with crystal, polished silverware, and fine china that gleamed in the soft lighting. Izzy had spared no expense in creating the perfect setting, every detail meticulously planned. This wasn't just a family reunion. It was her stage, her declaration. Izzy watched as her family settled around the table, their eyes wide as they took in the extravagant surroundings. It was almost too much for them to process. Her father, ever the skeptic, barely masked his discomfort as he looked around. Marcus had already muttered something about the needless luxury, though the hint of envy in his voice was unmistakable. Olivia sat in silence, her hand clutching her designer handbag tightly, her eyes flicking between the surroundings, and Izzy, as if searching for the right words, but finding none. "Is this really necessary?" Her father's voice broke the quiet tension. He looked at Izzy across the table, his expression guarded but weary. Izzy smiled, the faintest hint of defiance in her eyes. "Absolutely," she said, her voice calm and steady. "You see, Dad, the world isn't just about tradition and legacy. It's about innovation, something you've never been willing to understand." She stood up, her heels clicking against the polished floor as she walked toward the massive screens that hung from the walls. With a simple touch, the screens flickered to life, displaying the timeline of her journey. The first image appeared, her humble beginnings in the small apartment, working late into the night, struggling to break into a world that had no room for her. The family had never seen this part of her story. The long nights, the uncertainty, the small victories that had led to something far greater. Izzy didn't look at them. She didn't need to. This was her moment, and she would control it. "Here," she said, pressing a button. This is where it all began. The next image flashed onto the screen. It was an image of her first NFT collection, the one that had sold for $50,000. The room was silent as the family watched, unable to process what they were seeing. I was just a dreamer, she continued, her voice slightly softer now, but still filled with purpose. But that dream earned me enough to quit my job, to build something bigger, and the world started to notice. The next images appeared, one after the other. Her first million, then $10 million, then $100 million. The figures were staggering, a testament to her vision and hard work. Her family remained silent, stunned into inaction, their previous sneers and dismissive comments now replaced with an uncomfortable silence. And now, Izzy's voice rang out, more powerful than ever. My company is worth billions. This is the result of everything you told me I couldn't do. This is where I stand today, and none of you ever saw it coming. Her father opened his mouth to speak, but the words caught in his throat. There was no denying it anymore. Izzy had done what they thought was impossible. She had built an empire without their help, without their belief in her. This, she gestured to the screens, is my legacy, not the one you expected me to follow. And it's real, more real than anything any of you have built. The family sat in stunned silence, the weight of the truth settling over them. Olivia, who had always tried to overshadow Izzy with her own modest successes, now found herself silenced by the enormity of her sister's achievements. Marcus was the first to speak, his voice barely above a whisper. How did you do it? His voice was hoarse, tinged with awe and something deeper. Regret, perhaps. Izzy paused for a moment, letting the tension hang in the air. She had always craved their validation, but now, in this moment, she realized that she didn't need it. Not anymore. I did it by believing in myself, she said softly, her eyes meeting her father's for the first time since their arrival. I did it because I refused to follow a path that wasn't mine. I made my own way. And now it's time you understand that this is the future. There was no grand gesture, no triumphant speech, just the quiet certainty in her voice, the calm pride that radiated from her as she stood before them. She didn't need to prove herself anymore. The numbers, the success, they spoke for themselves. After the reveal, Izzy excused herself from the dining room, leaving her family to digest the weight of her success. They were still sitting at the table, eyes wide, faces frozen in disbelief. For the first time in years, she could hear the quiet hum of her own thoughts, the din of judgment, the whispers of her family's expectations. All of it had faded into silence. She walked through the expansive hallway of her private island resort, the glass doors leading to the balcony that overlooked the lush turquoise waters of the Caribbean. The sun was starting to set, casting a golden glow across the landscape. For a moment, she stood there, alone, letting the peaceful surroundings ground her. It wasn't until she heard footsteps behind her that she turned around. Her father stood in the doorway, his face no longer as stern as it had been earlier. He looked older, more worn, and for the first time in years, there was a vulnerability in his eyes. Izzy, Don Rivera's voice was quieter now, lacking the commanding authority it once carried. He stepped forward, hesitating just a little. We need to talk. Izzy didn't move, her gaze fixed on the horizon. She had anticipated this moment. She knew it was coming. But now that it was here, She wasn't sure how to feel. Part of her wanted to let the silence continue, to let the years of disappointment fester in the air between them. But another part of her, a part she hadn't fully recognized until now, knew that the only way to move forward was to face the past. "What is it, Dad?" she asked, her tone steady, yet tinged with a quiet edge. Dawn took a deep breath, clearly searching for the right words. I didn't know." He looked down at the floor for a moment, as if ashamed. "I didn't know you were capable of something like this. All those years, I thought you were just playing at something. I thought you were going to fail, but I can see now that I was wrong. I misjudged you." Izzy's pulse quickened. Hearing the words didn't soften the blow as much as she had expected. But there was something in his tone that struck her, a trace of respect, perhaps, or maybe guilt. She couldn't tell, but she wasn't ready to forgive him just yet. Not after everything he had put her through. "You weren't just wrong, Dad," Izzy said, her voice sharp. "You dismissed me. You dismissed everything I worked for, everything I believed in. You thought it was all just a game, a phase. But I've been building something real. And now, here I am, standing in front of you, showing you the reality you refused to see." Dawn's face hardened again, but this time there was no anger in his expression. It was something different, something almost regretful. He took a step closer to her, his hands held loosely at his sides. "I was scared, Izzy," he admitted, his voice rough. "I was scared of losing control. I wanted you to follow the path I had laid out for you because, well, because that's the only way I knew how to protect you. But I see now that I was wrong." Izzy closed her eyes, letting his words settle in her mind. For so many years, she had yearned to hear him say this, to hear him admit his mistakes, to hear him acknowledge her worth. But now, in this moment, it didn't feel as satisfying as she had imagined. It felt like too little, too late. "You didn't just want to protect me, Dad. You wanted to control me," she replied softly. "And I couldn't live that way anymore." There was a long silence between them, both of them standing there, staring at the ground, both wrestling with the weight of the years gone by. Finally, Don spoke again, his voice softer, more vulnerable than Izzy had ever heard it before. "I didn't know how to let go," he said quietly. "I didn't know how to let you be you." Izzy didn't answer right away. She was still processing his words, still trying to understand what it meant. But she knew one thing for certain. This conversation, this moment, was the first step toward something different. Maybe they would never be the family she had always dreamed of. Maybe things would never be the same again. But in this moment, Izzy had taken the first step toward her own version of closure. "I understand, Dad," she said, her voice quieter now. "But I can't keep carrying this weight. Not anymore." He nodded, a slight but meaningful gesture. "You've done well, Izzy," he said, a hint of pride creeping into his voice. "More than well. You've done something I never could have imagined, and for that, I'm proud of you." For the first time, Izzy allowed herself to truly hear the words. It wasn't the validation she had hoped for, but it was something real, something that, at least for now, felt like enough. As Dawn turned to leave, Izzy stood there for a moment, her thoughts swirling. It wasn't a happy ending. It wasn't a perfect resolution, but it was a beginning of something new, something she had fought for on her own terms. The morning after the confrontation with her father, Izzy stood by the expansive windows of her private suite, watching the horizon where the sky met the sea. The island was tranquil, the sound of the waves crashing gently against the shore, serving as a soft reminder of the peace she had fought for all these years. For the first time in a long time, she felt a quiet, almost surreal sense of relief. Her father's words still echoed in her mind, but they no longer carried the sting they once did. There had been no grand reconciliation, no tearful apology that would erase the years of doubt and control. But there had been something else, a shift. Her father had admitted his mistakes, and perhaps that was all she could expect from him. And yet, she knew the hard part wasn't over. This was only the beginning. Izzy walked over to the desk where her laptop was open, displaying the latest reports from Sullivan Digital Empire. The numbers were staggering, and her heart still raced when she saw them. She had built this from the ground up, and now, with the launch of her revolutionary platform just weeks away, she was on the brink of something even bigger. She had come so far, and there was no going back. But the reunion had been just the beginning. Her family's disbelief and their strained acceptance had only been the surface. Now, Izzy needed to decide how she would move forward, not just with her company, but with her family. The masks they had worn for so long had cracked, and the truth had been exposed. But she could feel the tension in the air as her family still adjusted to the revelation of her success. They were trying, but they didn't fully understand her world. They were still living in the past, in the safety of what they knew. She was living in the future, in a world they had never thought to embrace. Her phone buzzed, and she picked it up, recognizing the number immediately. It was Marcus. She hesitated for only a moment before answering. "Izzy." His voice came through, softer than the last time they'd spoken. "We need to talk." She sat back in the chair, her fingers lightly tapping against the armrest. "I'm listening," she said simply, but there was a weight to the words that she hadn't meant to add. "I've been thinking," Marcus continued, his voice hesitant, "about everything. About you. About us." There was a long pause, as though he was gathering his thoughts. "You know, I've always looked at you like you were the one who was making all the wrong choices. But I see it now. You weren't wrong. You were just different." Izzy exhaled slowly, trying to process the unexpected shift in his tone. "Different is one way to put it," she said, the bitterness from the past still lingering beneath her words. Marcus sighed on the other end. "I didn't know how to see you any other way, Izzy. You were always the failure in the family, the one who didn't follow the plan. But now, I get it. I understand why you had to do things the way you did. And I want to make things right between us." Her heart skipped a beat. Was this really Marcus, the brother who had always been so eager to stay in line, who had always sided with their father? There was something genuine in his voice, something that made her pause. "You don't have to make it right, Marcus," Izzy said, her voice quieter now. "It's already too late for that, but maybe we can start over. Maybe we can move forward from here." The silence on the other end stretched for a moment before Marcus spoke again. "I'd like that," he said, the sincerity clear in his voice. "I really would." Izzy put down the phone, the weight of the conversation sinking in. For the first time in years, she felt like she was taking control of everything. Not just her business, but her relationships, her future. It was no longer about trying to fit into a mold or waiting for approval. It was about moving forward, forging a path that was entirely her own. She stood up and walked to the balcony again, her eyes tracing the water below. There would always be challenges. There would always be people who doubted her, who didn't understand. But that was no longer her problem. She had built something incredible, and she was just getting started. Moving forward, she whispered to herself. She smiled softly, the weight of the past finally lifting from her shoulders. The future was calling, and it was time to answer.